Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to week 2. This week we're going to continue working on narratives in our writing. Our learning intention for today is we are learning to identify the parts of a narrative. Our success criteria, I can identify the orientation, I can identify the complication, I can identify the resolution, I can sequence events of a story to match the parts of a narrative. So what are imaginative narratives? Narratives are imaginative text that tells a story to entertain the reader. There are many types of narrative text, such as picture books, short stories, fairy tales, and myths and legends. To learn a little bit more about parts of a narrative, I'd like you to listen to this song by Jack Hartman. As you're listening to the song, I want you to think about what is he saying are the three main parts of the story? Who are the characters in the story and what's the setting of a story? You can see I've got the link address down the bottom you can type in, or you can click on the links in your learning timetable for week 2, or there's a link in your writing folder for week 2. So do you remember how he said there were three main parts of the story? We have the orientation, and that's at the beginning. And that tells the reader who's in the story, when and where the story happens. Then you've got the middle part. That's where our complication and our series of events. That tells the reader what the problem is and what events are leading up to the solution to solve that problem. And finally, you have the resolution at the end, and that is how you're telling the reader how the problem is resolved. Now, as we're going to be learning about narratives, I'm also going to teach you about how to write a narrative using the 7 steps to successful writing. I want you to think of these 7 steps. There are building blocks to great writing. Today's lesson is all about step 1, planning for success. Every successful piece of writing needs planning. We are going to start by learning how to use a story graph to identify the different parts of a narrative. So here's our story graph. Can you see it sort of looks like a mountain that we're gradually building up until we get to the top where we have our exciting ending. So we start with number 1, a sizzling start. We're going to grab our reader's attention and want them to read our story. Then we're going to provide our reader with some backfill. We're going to tell them who's in the story, where it's happening, and when it's happening. Then we're going to get to the good part, the middle part, where we're going to have a pebble, which have a small problem, and that's going to build into a rock, which is a medium problem, and that's going to build into our boulder, which is a real main problem of the story. And then finally, we're going to come up here for our exciting ending. And the last part is we're just going to wrap it up, the story up, by telling them what happens to the character after the problem is solved. So now we're going to try and put this with what we already know about, that we know that a story has 3 parts. And the first part was our orientation. And our orientation takes in our sizzling start and our backfill. Our pebble, rock, and boulder, well, that becomes that's our complication and series of events. And the final part is our resolution. And that's where we've got our exciting ending and our character wrap up. Now I'm going to read you a well-known story, and I'm going to show you how we're going to plot this on a story map. I decided to do Little Red Riding Hood because I thought everybody knows that story. So this is just my quick version of it. So here's our first part of the story, the orientation. Remember, this is where we're going to tell the reader who's in the story and where it's taking place and why it's happening. Once upon a time, there lived a young girl called Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother asked her to take a cake and some cough medicine to her sick grandmother. Grandmother lived in a small house in the woods. So now we're up to the second part of the story, the complication. Something's going to go wrong. During her journey through the woods, Little Red Riding Hood met a wolf. The wolf tricked Little Red Riding Hood into picking some flowers so he could beat her to grandmother's house. He planned to eat them both for his lunch. So there's the main problem. So now we know our complication. Now we're going to be working on our series of events. These are the events that are going to lead up to solving the problem. The wolf quickly ran to grandmother's house and put grandmother into the cupboard. The wolf tried to trick Little Red Riding Hood by dressing up as her grandmother. The wolf tried to eat Little Red Riding Hood. She screams out for help. So now we're up to the last part, the resolution and our wrapping up of the characters. A woodsman was walking through the forest. He heard Little Red Riding Hood screaming for help. He scared the wolf away with his axe and then got Grandma out of the cupboard. Little Red Riding Hood promised never to go off the path again and not to talk to strangers. They all lived happily ever after. So let's see if we can put Little Red Riding Hood onto a story graph. Now, do you remember all the steps I said? First one was our sizzling start. Little Red Riding Hood set off to visit her sick grandmother. She was warned to stay on the path in the woods. At backfill, who? The characters was Little Red Riding Hood. Why was she going? Because her mother said that her grandmother was sick and Little Red Riding Hood had to take a basket of food to her. Problem number 1. Little Red Riding Hood starts to pick flowers in the woods and gets lost, and she meets a wolf. The wolf wants to eat them for lunch. Problem number 2. The wolf runs to Grandma's house and locks Grandma in a cupboard. Now we're coming to the big problem, the boulder. The wolf disguises himself and tries to eat Little Red Riding Hood. Resolution, the ending. Little Red Riding Hood screams for help. A passing woodcutter runs in and scares the wolf away with his axe. And our final wrap up. Little Red Riding Hood promises never to go off the path and not to talk to strangers again. Can you see how we've plotted the story all the way up to our exciting ending? So now it's your turn. Once again, I've chosen a really well-known story, but I'll read it to you. And as I read it, I'd like you to think about the 3 parts of the narrative. What part of the story is the orientation? What part of the story is the complication and series of events? And finally, what part is the resolution? So sit back and listen to the story. Once upon a time, there was a mother pig with 3 little pigs. Sadly, she did not have enough money to keep them, so she sent them out to seek their fortune. The first little pig went off and met a man with a bundle of straw. He asked him, "Please, sir, can I have that straw so I can build a house?" The man felt sorry for the little pig, so he gave him the straw, and the little pig built a house with it. The second little pig met a man with a bundle of wood and asked him, "Please, sir, can I have that wood to build a house?" The man felt sorry for the little pig, so he gave him the wood, and the little pig built his house with it. The third little pig met a man with a load of bricks and asked, "Please, sir, can I have those bricks to build a house with?" The man felt sorry for the little pig, so he gave him the bricks, and he built his house with them. One day along came a wolf who knocked at the house made of straw, and he said, "Little pig, let me come in." The first little pig answered, "No, no, no, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. So he huffed, and he puffed, and he blew the house in, and the scared little pig ran away. Then along came the wolf to the house made of wood. The wolf said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, no, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," replied the second little pig. "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. So he huffed, and he puffed, and he puffed, and he huffed. At last he blew the house down. The scared little pigs ran away. Then the wolf came to the house made of bricks. He called out again as he'd done with the other pigs and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," called the third little pig. And again the wolf cried, "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in." Well, he huffed, and he puffed, and he puffed, and he huffed and he huffed and he puffed, but he could not blow the house down. This made the wolf very angry indeed, and he declared he would eat up the little pig and his brothers. He decided he would climb down the chimney after them. When the little pig saw what the wolf was about to do, he put on a pot of water and built up a blazing fire underneath it. Just as the wolf was coming down the chimney, the little pig took the cover off the pot. The wolf falls into the pot of boiling water. Then he jumps out of the chimney and is never seen again. The first and second little pigs agree not to be so lazy, and each builds another house of bricks just like their brothers. The three little pigs lived happily ever after. Here's our first task for the week. In your writing folder, you've got a copy of these two worksheets. On the first page, you can see I've got pictures of the story. What I'd like you to do is cut them up, and then I'd like you to sequence them according to the three parts of the story. Which two pictures made up the orientation, which shows the problem, and which two pictures show the resolution. Once you're happy with them, stick them down next to the correct headings on our recording sheet.